Hey, Kevin, welcome back to the show. As a way of getting started, give us an update.
Well, I always love being on here. Thanks for having me on. So for the first two-thirds of my career, I was a buyer with the U.S. military, right? And had the podcast. You've actually been on our podcast, and I was a contracting officer, and I bought all kinds of stuff, R&D and aircraft and vehicles, all kinds of things. And while I was on the government side, I was frustrated at how little most sellers really understood about the decision trees I went through as a contracting officer on the buyer side. And so the idea of starting my business was to help them understand, okay, well, what's the buyer thinking? So in 2011, started the business, started to help people understand what the context they need is from the buyer side. And that's the problem we solve. We give them context so they can win more work. And here we are. I've been listening to your podcast for years. You see a lot of the same language. 10 years later, we've got it's been really fun. And now we have customers from coast to coast, and it's really starting to take off. And right now is a particularly time to be active in the government market. And so I figured it was worth you and I chatting about some of the things that we're seeing to help folks.
Well, let's start there. What are you seeing?
Well, the biggest thing right now is at the macro level, the B2C market, business to consumer, it's in free fall still, right? The B2B market is, well, it's not as bad, but it's not great either. The B2G market, what we're seeing is already starting to stabilize. This is kind of normal, but a lot of this, I'll give you a couple of reasons. The first one, the work still has to get done, right? I mean, the funding that was already, it's been budgeted, allocated, committed, and obligated. And those are all government speak terms for the fact that the government folks have this money to spend. They have to use it, right? So at the macro level, COVID and the Department of State, a lot of them, their mission has to keep going, right? That's how this works. In fact, last Friday, in the middle of all this, NASA awarded SpaceX a multi-billion, is up to $7 billion contract for commercial launch services. So what we're seeing is the government folks, there was a dip when they had to get home and figure out, how am I going to work from home? A lot of them were already working from home 2 days a week. Now they're just home 5 days a week, but the work still has to get done. And this is different for those of us who have been doing this a long time, because after 9/11, I couldn't do my job as a contracting officer if I wasn't in the office.
Yeah.
Well, now they can. So we're seeing that the momentum is already starting to correct, right? And of course, you also have growth in other areas that nobody was thinking about 6 weeks ago.
Yeah.
In addition, based on our history, on the historical data, right, the federal government is always going to invest in projects that are going to restart the economy at the macro level. And so we're starting to already see conversations about finally working on this $2 trillion that people want to invest in our infrastructure, in roads and bridges and all that kind of stuff, right? So that's one of the things that got us out of the depression way back in the 1920s, right? So you look at the data historically, after a recession, the government tends to be the one that number one has the money and is also investing it. So that's what we're seeing. That's already starting to happen.
And what are your clients telling you right now?
Right, that's where a lot of this comes from, is that it took them, a couple of them said they're about 90% effective from continuing their government contracts. A lot of that is it's taken longer to get stuff done, but that's the time they used to commute. So it's a net, it's about the same, right?
Yeah.
And because the government is understanding, they're in the same boat. The funny thing that they're telling us, their contracting officers are actually more responsive than they had been in the past. I mean, it's traditional. That's the biggest challenge you have in government contracting, is getting the contracting officers to talk to you. That's one of the things that we do, is help them break through that to get them to talk to you. Well, in this case, they don't have as many meetings. They're at home. They don't have as many distractions. And again, they want to get the work done. So they're even more engaged, because they don't want to have a really miserable end of fiscal year because they didn't get anything done, like during the whole month of April. So that you're seeing that momentum kick up.
And that's it. Plus, they want to still have their vacation this summer.
That too. You all want to still be able to take a breath. And so at the buyer level, what we're seeing, now, like a lot of our customers are telling us, but I'm also seeing this just from experience. In the short term, for the next 6 months, the contracting officers are getting a lot more, we'll call it authority to move things faster, right? And so some of the things that are kicking in right now, federal buyers, they have special authorities to do things without competition. I mean, there's a lot of those rules, they exist. But on top of that, we have Congress and the president who's expanded those authorities, the ones that already existed, plus there's new ones that don't normally exist. And so here's what it looks like, right? a lot of things that you can buy with a government credit card. In the old days, last year, $3,500 was a limit for that. Well, a couple of years, actually, it was the middle of last year, they bumped that from 3,500 to 10,000. Okay, that's a big deal. Now, because of the Stafford Act, which is basically what the president said, this is a declared emergency. Now it's 20,000. So what that feels like is that you used to be able to get a government buyer to buy from a contracting officer or otherwise, and this is federal. My thing is federal, so we're talking about federal contracts. $3,500 was their limit on the credit card. Now it's 20,000. Just like that, we've removed a barrier, right? The next level up that we're seeing a change in is the simplified acquisition procedures, which is these are set aside just for small businesses. And for those of you following along in regulations, this is FAR Part 13. Go check that out. You just Google it. You'll see a lot of this stuff. And these are purchases that are bigger than a credit card, but they go up to, used to be 150,000. Then it was 250,000. Right now, it's 750,000. In fact, it's 1.5 million if you're outside the United States. So you went from something that used to be limited to 150K and you got 10X that.
Yeah.
So that's a huge barrier that went away. Okay. On top of that, you have direct awards to 8A contractors. We're seeing an increase in what are called letter contracts. And for those of you who don't know, a letter contract basically is I, as a contracting officer, and say, okay, I have this requirement. I know you can do it. It's about, I awarded a letter, for example, a letter contract worth $8 million. And I said, okay, I can give you half the money. We haven't actually decided how much this is going to cost, but here's the money. Here's the contract. Go. We'll negotiate it along the way. And the way that works, you have between 90 and 180 days to, they call it definitize the contract. Well, there's legislation and direction from, for example, there's an Air Force acquisition leader who actually put out a letter that said he is encouraging they use more letter contracts because they need to keep the money flowing to the defense industry base, right? That's what he's focused on. People do this in their own best interest, right? Classic Brian Burns. They need to keep this thing moving. They need to keep these businesses on the other side of it. So a lot of this stuff is kicking up. And here's the last one is there's a letter, and this is from the executive office of the president. And it said that contracting officers have the ability to retool contracts to make them fit with what the COVID-19 needs are. So what that could look like is you have a contract providing security services to the federal government. The building that you used to secure is no longer open because, well, it's open, but nobody's in it, right? But that's a security services contract. So they can retool it and say, okay, now I need you to go protect the hospital. I need you to go protect, whatever. And so the work is going to keep getting done, and they're going to get more and more creative. And the contracting officers are getting so much direction that this has always. You there?
Yeah.
Yep. I see you.
And so, for the people who are listening and sell to the government, what would you suggest they do?
Okay. So, well, the first thing I'd say is go to FAR Part 18 for the Federal Acquisition Regulation. Just Google FAR Part 18, go to acquisition.gov, and then click on the number 18. There are it's a short list. It's actually a pretty short part of the FAR, and it lists all of the things that the government can do more quickly. A lot of those things they can always do, but now they're easier, right? So those are the things you're going to see more of. On top of that, you're also going to see a couple of parts of that FAR reference that say these are the things that you can only do when there's a Stafford Act and when there's an actual disaster of some sort, right? The other thing is think about if you have a contract, okay, right now you need to get it done. One of the things as a contracting officer to think through is I have 5 things I got to deal with. Okay. I have the what am I buying? I have the when do I need it? I have the how am I going to get it, which that's the acquisition strategy. I have the how much am I going to pay for it? And then who's going to do it?
Yeah.
Like, do I have somebody that can actually do this? Well, right now, those first 4, I've got workarounds to them. Okay. I know what the requirement is because everybody's telling me what it is. The schedule, I need it now. Everything I need right now. The competition, I don't have to compete it as much. Like how I'm going to do it, the acquisition strategy is going to be thinner. It's going to be shorter. And then the price, okay, I'm not going to count nickels right now. I need to get this done. But the thing that I'm not going to mail it in on, and this is what we're telling our customers, be very aware of the past performance is what I'm worried about. I got to know you can actually get this done. Because if I give you a contract to get this done and you can't do it, I got to do it twice. Yeah. Well, now I'm even more frustrated. So again, people do what's in their own best interest. What's in the best interest of me as a contracting officer is get this done once, move on to the next one. The best way to do that is to work with people that I already know And if I don't have that, then somebody that I know can do it, which is why you see a lot of known companies like, Ford Motor Companies asked to make equipment because they know they can manufacture stuff. So if you're a startup and you never manufactured stuff for the government before, this is not the time to knock on the door and say, hey, I can help.
Yeah.
There are other things you can help with, but that's not the best way to do it. And understand that if you have commercial past performance, that's better. But what I'm looking for as a contracting officer is, have you done this for the government before? Like, do you know how to get paid as a government contractor? Do you know what our systems are? Are you going to be low maintenance? Because I want to give you this contract, know it's going to get done, and then I'm going to move on to the next thing because I got a lot of stuff to get done. That's probably the biggest thing that we're telling people right now. And then the next thing I'll tell you is if you're new to the market, not to discourage folks, and there's a lot of opportunity here, there are a lot of entry points for new folks. The two ways I would enter as a new contractor is, number one, through subcontracting. They operate a lot like business to business contracts. Yeah, there's nuance to that. There's work share and there's flow down clauses and payment terms, that kind of stuff. But functionally, it's going to be easier for you to get in. And on top of that, you're writing somebody else's past performance. So again, it's okay if you're not a known quantity, if the face to the government, the prime contractor is. Okay. So that's one of the best places to get in. As far as how to find those, the free places, there's yet, and you want to start directly with the government buyer, then it's a little harder to lift, but go back to my original point. Start with credit card purchases.
Yep.
Start with the small stuff. Start with something that you know they need, that your commercial experience doing. Like, let's say if you sell medical masks, okay, that's something they can buy with a credit card, and you've done it before, so off we go, right? If you're in the market already, then we go back to be the path of least resistance. Focus on the contracts you already have, focus on the customers you already have, and focus on the contract vehicles you already have. That's I want you to come to me and say, okay, I've got this vehicle. I know you need these things. Here's how we get started because I have this contract in place already. So that's what we're telling people the easiest path to get going. Be the path of least resistance. That's probably the best advice I can give people.
And a lot of times, certainly the salespeople are not dealing with the contracting officer yet. They're dealing with the end user, the requester, the user of the product. How do they coach them on this is the time to go to your contracting officer and explore these things, or just, put it on the credit card, get something done?
Yeah, and that's a big part of it, is knowing that the credit card can be purchased, knowing that instead of trying to sell them a $50,000 project, sell them a $15,000 project, because that can go on a credit card. Because then when they go to the contracting officer who has the credit card in his hand and he says, hey, I need this, can you buy it? I'm going to go, yep, I'm going to charge it. And it's a 15-second conversation versus if you come to me and say, well, I want to do this as a sole source contract. This is an 8A company. You've added work. You're no longer the path of least resistance. So knowing what these paths are is how you coach your basically we did this a lot. We actually coach a lot of sales folks because what they run into, they'll be in a meeting with a customer and the customer will say, yes, I want that. And then the sales guy says, okay, well, how do we get the contract? And then the government person who's not a contracting officer says, well, I thought you knew.
Yeah.
And so what we have is the classic business sale versus technical sale.
Right.
And so that's our superpower is the business sale. So understand that you as a seller, if you understand the business sale, you understand the path they're going to go down. Like what is the difference between using a commercial item under a simplified acquisition procedure? That can be up to $13 million right now. That's a big contract when I can get that done in 2 days. That's huge, but you got to know what that process is. And that's, again, FAR 13.5 is where that's all written up.
And what's the limit on the credit card? You go down, let's say you want to break it into 5 transactions.
There is a rule about that. You can't break it up into, you can't deliberately break it into, you can't separate the requirement, right? But if it's a service, if it's something that you're going to be doing over the next couple of
Monthly.
months,
Yeah.
If you know that these are installments, like if I'm going to have 15 today, 14 tomorrow, 16 next week, that's different. But if you know that it's $100,000 requirement and you make it 5 transactions, the funny thing is, it's not a red flag today, but in 6 months when everybody audits, that's when it's going to be a red flag.
Yeah. Just don't do it day after day. Do it a month at a time, maybe.
Correct. Yeah. And that's all part of it, is you're meeting a requirement as it comes up.
And are services easier to get through than products?
Easier is a relative term. It depends what they need. That's a big part of it. And one of the things that we beat the drum a lot about is targeting, is knowing what the customer needs. Right now, I'd say products is probably what the government, well, particular parts of the government need.
Yeah.
There are other parts of the government that specifically need more services. They need more medical support. They need more staffing people. They need the ability to test things. Those are all services. So depending on which agency you talk to, you're going to get a different answer. Actually, there's a couple of really good sites. I can send them to you. You can put them on the site that aggregate all this. In fact, MITRE has a really good site that aggregates all of the things that the different agencies are looking for, so that you're not just shooting in the dark. There are lots of federal sources to find this stuff, but I mean, this is COVID specific. So it helps you to kind of filter.
Yeah. So the sales rep should be able to or want to educate their users on how to get this done. Start with a credit card. And if it's bigger than that, maybe contact you or get some coaching on how to approach the contracting officer in a way that's easy for them.
Yeah, be the path of least resistance. And it's things like knowing that if you're an 8A, how about this? If you're a veteran-owned small business, if you're a women-owned small business, those are all advantages that you can use to get sole source contracts, especially in these circumstances. Or if you've got a lot of past history, and I mentioned that letter contract, that is a unique vehicle. Here to give you some context on that. The way it works is you're supposed to get 50% of the money up front. The agencies are saying now you can give up to 95% of the money up front. That's a path of least resistance for me as a contracting officer, because I don't have as much administrative effort to do that, right?
Yeah.
Well, if you know what a letter contract is and what you're doing is much bigger than, like, if it's a software upgrade or if it's access to an Intel community, that's a huge part where I would be using these kind of things, is I need to keep these people here. Well, I'm going to use a letter contract. Well, if you as the seller if you're a sales guy and you know what a letter contract is and you introduce it and you can explain it, so that when the customer goes to the contracting officer and generally knows how it works and knows how to make it the path of least resistance for the contracting officer, that's how you get, a 7-8 figure project done through a letter contract.
And probably the end users aren't aware of these things.
No. For the most part, I mean, we talk a lot about the businesses don't train people on how to spend money. Yeah. The only time I ever got training on how to spend money was when I worked for the DoD. I got a lot of training on how to do it, because it's our tax dollars. They want to make sure you do it right.
Right. Yeah. But the end users are going to say, oh, it's even harder. And
yes.
Truth, it's easier.
Yeah, especially right now.
Yes.
But even outside of the COVID environment, even out of the pandemic, there are lots of paths that if you know what the right path is, and so much of it has to do with targeting and focusing on the right agencies, and what you do actually solves their problem. It's classic sales, but knowing what the specific approach that the acquisition strategy that the government would use, it's huge in the impact of your flash to bang. I'm actually getting the deal done.
And so if I was a sales rep, I'd go through my pipeline and see, who is either directly federal or indirectly through system integrators or 8As or partners.
Yes.
And get the conversation started about approaches to get these letter contracts, credit cards moving.
Yeah. Just the idea of what do you know the government needs? What are you hearing that they need in your niche? And then be able to say, okay, well, that's something you can put on a credit card. That's a service that you can put. And then, it's really interesting once you start teaming with individual companies that can give you that advantage, like a veteran-owned small business with the VA. The VA is very busy right now, right? Well, the VA prefers to actually, the Veterans Affairs, they like to give contracts to veterans. Well, you team with a veteran-owned small business, and most of them have that on their LinkedIn page. That's not cryptic information. You can find it pretty
It's not
easy.
hidden.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's not like clearances or something, but
exactly.
It's out there. They want you to know about it.
Correct. Yeah, because it's a marketing strategy for them. It's a way to win.
If you can't find it in LinkedIn, just Google it.
Yes, and there are official lists. I mean, the government keeps track of these lists. I mean, there are more fancy ways, but it's pretty easy usually. On their website, they'll have it.
And they want to work with you because they get a decent chunk.
Yes, and there are rules about how much of a chunk. Usually they have to have a bigger chunk. For services, they're supposed to do 51% of the work. But for construction, I think, again, I'm going off of memory here, it's roughly 10%. So that prime contractor you team with, 10% of the overall production of the work that's done on this construction contract is done by that prime. Because it's construction, it's a different animal. They may be managing it overall, but you're bringing all the materials to it. And that's if you're in construction. There are lots of nuances to this. But the fact is, look for those people that are in the market already that you can team with, and then figure out how to team with them.
And what is the dollar amount where it becomes so complicated that they should contact you?
That's a good question. It's usually a couple million. I think it's probably the best place. We're really good at giving advice. I mean, this stuff is not where we normally live.
Yeah.
The 80% of a lot of the work that goes through the government is small credit cards and things like that. Where we live is the contracts that are about $1 million or up. In other words,
Yeah.
things that you got to shape. You got to, like, an actual contracting officer is making an acquisition strategy to buy it. Like, I don't need an acquisition strategy to buy something with a credit card. I need to think through, how am I going to do this? If it's a $5 million 5-year contract, there's a plan I got to make. I have to a whole bunch of different rules that I have to apply. And even now, I still have to apply some of them, right? But yeah, that's when folks come to us, is that the part they actually have to compete for, or they want to make it so they don't have to compete. How do you convince the contracting officer a year ahead of time to make that an 8A sole source contract to you? That's what we do.
And are there any particular areas you see slowing down?
Yeah, funny enough, well, I don't know, that's probably the wrong way to say it. Interestingly enough, is probably the right way to say it. The DoD, I think, may have to give up some over the next couple of years. The DoD may give up some of its budget to some of these other civilian agencies, where that's what we're dealing with for the short term. Interestingly, the reason I don't want to make any dire predictions, but that's probably because it's one of the biggest budgets. The other thing we might see slowing down is some emphasis, some of the long-term projects, like remodeling projects, some of the, like, 6-month redo of this building, that kind of stuff. Like, GSA owns a lot of buildings, and that's what they do. They lease a lot of them out and get them refurbished. Those may slow down. But I think, like I said before, in 6 months or so, when Congress uses the ability to load up all these construction projects that are infrastructure based, we may see a surge in that. But I think building remodeling is a great example of something that, okay, we had budget for this, but when we're having to put in partitions between people to make sure they don't get sick, we're not going to worry about painting these rooms anymore.
Yeah.
Or how about this? They're not at the office right now, so we're not worried about cleaning the building. So yeah, there's a lot of, like, building maintenance that's in the short term is going to slow down. But yeah, I think there's going to, in 2 years or so, there's going to be a battle over budget. It's unavoidable, just because when you put $2 trillion in the economy, that's coming from somewhere, and we can debate the politics of that, but there's a future time to deal with it. And the way to think of that is, you remember the fiscal cliff in 2012. That was the other side of all the government spending that was done to get us out of the last recession. Is eventually there's a point when we say, okay, we can't keep doing this.
Right.
And that's how it usually plays out. So that's 2 years from now. Right. But for now, yeah, there's not going to be a whole lot of slowdowns, except for those areas that are not at all related to COVID. And most of those will not kick in for a while. If I have my budget for the year, I'm spending it this year. Right. Next fiscal year, I mean, I get my budget. So I think that's what you're going to see.
Because otherwise they lose it next year, right? Follow.
Yes,
money.
And that's, yeah, there'll be haircuts a lot of places. That's what they call it when they take 10% off everybody. What we're trying to figure out right now, in fact, it's a big discussion among our team. That's what we do, is try to look around corners. We're trying to figure out, where's the tractor beam going to be? Where is the place that's going to pull the money the most? Like, after 9/11, it was the global war on terror. If it was associated with that, it was pulling money from everybody. Well, what's the tractor beam going to be this time? Is it going to be vaccines? Is it going to be the ability to be ready to having a lot of tests? Is it going to be hospitals? We have to figure out what that is, because where it's going to means it's being pulled haircut style, 10% from everybody from other spots. I don't think there'll be a huge dip anywhere that's that noticeable, but everybody's going to be tighter on budgets for the next few years after this.
Yeah, cool. Hey, Kevin, I really appreciate your time. Where can people go to learn about you and your company?
Well, the easiest way is, my last position as a contracting officer was at MacDill Air Force Base here in Tampa. So my company is named after the Skyway Bridge. So skywayacq.com, is it short for acquisition, is our website. And you can look me up on LinkedIn. It's Kevin Jans, Jan as in Nicholas, S as in Sam. And then, yeah, we actually do answer the phone. So you can call us at 877-884-5280, old school.